is Lainie Plattner, and this is my mhi554 outcomes evaluation example of taking on an adaptive challenge by using outcomes and measures. I feel like this is actually perfect timing for this topic because I was recently faced with an adaptive challenge at work. Myself and a few colleagues were tasked with making our inter-office communication plan more efficient, more streamlined, and overall just more effective. I will get into the details a little bit later about the entire overhaul, but it's a great example of an adaptive challenge because it could not have been done without significantly changing how the organization currently operates, which is something that Gilbert says is an important and crucial characteristic of adaptive problems. And this was a venture we were going to have to figure out as we worked through the process. The initial communication issue was discovered when the financial department at our organization recognized a discrepancy in the monthly revenue, and it was much lower than usual, which is always a red flag, especially for the CFO. And after doing some digging, our account receivable specialist realized it was due to specific incident reports, and from here on out, I'll probably just start referring to them as IRs, that were being filed. We do our IRs pretty often. They're usually pretty simple and involve basic occurrences like a negative behavior of our participants who are adults with developmental disabilities, doing something such as yelling, or maybe falling and injuring themselves. But it was realized that these specific reports that were having an impact on the bottom line were actually due to a lack of communication between departments. And that specific month, we had 7 of those reports. I think one of the most crucial facts about the circumstances is that the leadership team would have had no idea otherwise about this communication issue had it not been for the financial discovery during reconciliation. This is crucial because to objectify the quality of care, it's necessary to communicate results of data analysis to the appropriate individuals, and in this case, those individuals are the leadership team, who, again, like I said, would have otherwise had no idea what was going on. It's also important because important decisions being made without adequate understanding and information on part of the crucial stakeholders can create financial difficulty, and these issues overall will affect the bottom line of the organization. Plan, Do, Check, Act is one example of our performance improvement methodology, and I think our process definitely followed along these stages. Phase 1, which is the plan phase, requires that stakeholders formulate an assumption about care and develop a hypothesis. For us, that hypothesis was that the lack of communication was impacting the status of these IRs, which impacted the reimbursement of our organization from the Department of Developmental Disabilities, and which therefore had a negative impact on the financial situation of the organization. And this, of course, all represents that the quality of care has, in fact, gone down. Communication systems within an organization can be transformable and flexible processes, so we decided to focus our efforts on changing the overall adaptive challenge at this specific point within the system. Also, the number of these specific sorts of IRs seemed to be the most direct and measurable outcome to figure out whether the implementation of our communication plan was being successful. Figuring out this objectifying methodology was important. It was during the next step of the improvement plan, the quote, do phase, where the leadership team decided to establish a communications committee that would develop a flexible yet definitive communication plan, which would then be presented to the leadership team for suggestions and edits. And once approved, the plan would be shared with the direct care staff, who are the ones that are in the trenches, so to speak, and where the communication chain must first initiate as well as come back to full circle in order to be successful. The communications committee, we were certain to include the leadership staff in the plan as well as the direct care staff, because it is a great example of working to create a sense of organization-wide values, involvement, and accountability. During this phase, we also created a standard deviation. At the time, we didn't really call it that because we didn't know that's what it was. But the standard deviation was 0 of these specific IRs each month. The third stage, checking our intervention, is where measurements and data come in. The original month where the problematic IRs were noticed was in March, and during our June and July wrap-up meetings, we noticed that the number was actually 0. And just a side note, the plan was officially introduced to the organization in mid-May. So the fact that we were 0 away from our standard deviation is great news about the implementation and impact of our communication plan. We did recently have an August wrap-up meeting, and we had one problematic IR. So the good news is that we are still much lower than the 7 we had in March. And from here on out, the leadership team is looking at where in the process something occurred that allowed this issue to resurface. In the 4th and final stage, which is the ACT phase, is when we finally implement the plan and integrated it into our organization structure. We did this by, of course, as I mentioned earlier, introducing the communication plan to the staff, but also by adding the data checking process to the agenda for every monthly meeting that we have. The plan was also written into our employee packet, which is pretty definitive and kind of neat as well. An employee culture that is accepting of change is crucial to internalizing the value that change represents. In terms of our organization's culture, the adaptation was easy to implement because none of the staff wants to file IRs. First off, IRs are detrimental to the participant that's mentioned in them, as they'll come up, they'll sort of come back to bite them, so to speak, when they have their yearly meetings with case managers and service providers, etc. And also, they're basically just, IRs are basically just really time-consuming for staff to write as well, so nobody really wants to write them. It was also an easy sell in terms of change because previous to this whole discussion and discovery, the staff didn't really realize that there was a communication issue or that there was even a certain process that they were supposed to be following, the direct care staff, that is. And you can't fix a problem if you don't really know what the problem is. So in conclusion, this specific adaptive challenge became apparent after showing up in the financial books, which after reading through some of the books seems to be a fairly common trend. After analyzing the process in which that error occurred, the error being ineffective communication, we realized a quantifiable and representative measurement to look at the implementation effectiveness was the number of these specific kinds of incidents reports that were happening each month. After checking on the monthly progress, we realized that we were 0 away from our standard deviation, of course with the exception of last month where we were 1 away, and that the implementation of a streamlined communication plan was in fact making a difference in regards to this adaptive challenge.